Chapter 10. Moving along the trail at a gentle pace, clouds darkening the sky and drums whinny of memory or anticipation. A turn to the left and uphill. The ground is brown, yellow, back to brown again. The trees squat down, draw apart. Grasses wave between them in the cool and rising breeze. A quick fire in the sky. A rumble shakes loose raindrops. Steep and rocky now, and the wind tugs at my cloak. Up, up. Up to where the rocks are streaked with silver and the trees have drawn their line. The grasses, green fires, die down in the rain. Up to the craggy, sparkling, rain-washed heights, where the clouds rush and boil like a mud-gorged river at flood crest. The rain stings like buckshot, and the wind clears its throat to sing. We rise, and the crest comes into view, like the head of a startled bull. Horns guarding the trail. Lightnings twist about their tips, dance between them. The smell of ozone as we reach that place and rush on through. The rain suddenly blocked, the wind shunted away. Emerging on the farther side, there is no rain. The air is still. The sky smoothed and darkened to a proper star-filled black. Meteors cut and burn, cauterizing to after-image scars, fading. Moons cast like a handful of coins, 3 bright dimes, a dull quarter, a pair of pennies, one of them tarnished and scarred. Down, then, that long winding way. Hoofclops clear and metallic in the night air. Somewhere a cat-like cough. A dark shape crossing the lesser moon, ragged and swift. Downward. The land drops away at either hand, darkness below. Moving along the top of an infinitely high, curved wall, the way itself bright with moonlight. The trail buckles, folds, grows transparent. Soon it drifts, gauzy and filamentous. Stars beneath as well as above. Stars below on either side. There is no land. There is only the night. Night and the thin translucent trail I had to try to ride. To learn how it felt against some future use. It is absolutely silent now, and the illusion of slowness attaches to every movement. Shortly, the trail falls away, and we move as if swimming underwater at some enormous depth. The stars bright fish. It is freedom. It is the power of the hell ride that brings an elation. Like yet unlike the recklessness that sometimes comes in battle. The boldness of a risky feat well learned. The rush of rightness following the finding of the poem's proper word. It is these and the prospect itself, riding. From nowhere to nowhere, perhaps. Across and among the minerals and fires of the void, free of earth and air and water. We race a great meteor, we touch upon its bulk, speeding across its pitted surface, down, around, then up again. It stretches into a great plain. It lightens, and it yellows. It is sand. It is sand. Sand now beneath our movement. The stars fade out as the darkness is diluted to a morning full of sunrise. Swaths of shade ahead. Desert trees within them. Ride for the dark. Crashing through. Bright birds burst forth, complain and resettle. Among the thickening trees, darker the ground, narrower the way. Palm fronds shrink to hand size. Barks darken. A twist to the right, a widening of the way. Our hoofs striking sparks from cobblestones. The lane enlarges and becomes a tree-lined street. Tiny row of houses flash by. Bright shutters, marble steps, painted screens. Set back beyond flagged walks. Passing a horse-drawn cart, loaded with fresh vegetables. Human pedestrians turning to stare. A small buzz of voices. On, passing beneath a bridge. Coursing the stream till it widens to river, taking it down to the sea. Thudding along the beach beneath a lemon sky, blue clouds scudding, the salt, the wrack, the shells, the smooth anatomy of driftwood, white spray off the lime-colored sea. Racing to where the place of waters ends at a terrace, mounting, each step crumbling and roaring down behind, losing its identity, joined with the boom of the surf. Up to the flat-topped tree-grown plain, a golden city shimmering, mirage-like at its end. The city grows, darkens beneath a shadowy umbrella. Its gray towers stretch upward, glass and metal flashing light through the murk. The towers begin to sway. The city falls in upon itself, soundlessly as we pass. Towers topple, dust boils, rises, is pinked by some lesser glow. A gentle noise, as of a snuffed candle drifting by. A dust storm, quickly falling, giving pace to fog. Through it, the sounds of automobile horns. A drift, a brief lift, a break in the gray-white, pearl-white shifting. Our hoofprints on the shoulder of the highway. To the right, endless rows of unmoving vehicles. Pearl-white, gray-white, drifting again. Directionless shrieks and wailings. Random flashes of light. Rising once more. The fogs lower and ebb. Grass, grass, grass. Clear now the sky and delicate blue. A sun racing to set. Birds. A cow in the field, chewing, staring and chewing. Leaping a wooden fence to ride a country road. A sudden chill beyond the hill. The grasses are dry and snow's on the ground. Tin-roofed farmhouse atop a rise, curl of smoke above it. Onwards. The hills grow up, the sun rolls down, darkness dragged behind, a sprinkle of stars. Here a house, set far back. There another, long driveway wound among old trees, headlights. Off to the side of the road. Draw rein and let it pass. I wiped my brow, dusted my shirt front and sleeves. I patted Drum's neck. The oncoming vehicle slowed as it neared me, and I could see the driver staring. I gave the reins a gentle movement, and Drum began walking. The car braked to a halt, and the driver called something after me, but I kept going. Moments later, I heard him drive off. It was country road for a time after that. I traveled at an easy pace, passing familiar landmarks and recalling other times. A few miles later, and I came to another road, wider and better. I turned there, staying on the shoulder to the right. A sliced moon shone above the hills to my left. There were a few small clouds passing overhead, touched to the moon's quarter with a soft, dusty light. Excuse me. There was very little wind, an occasional stirring of branches, no more. After a time, I came to a series of dips in the road, telling me I was almost there. A curve and a couple more dips. I saw the shoulder beside the boulder beside the driveway. I read my address upon it. I drew rein then and looked up the hill. There was a station wagon in the driveway and a light on inside the house. I guided Drum off the road and across a field into a stand of trees. I tethered him behind a pair of evergreens and rubbed his neck, and told him I would not be long. I returned to the road, no cars in sight. I crossed over and walked up the far side of the driveway, passing behind the station wagon. The only light in the house was in the living room off to the right. I made my way around the left side of the house to the rear. I halted when I reached the patio, looking around. Something was wrong. The backyard was changed. A pair of decaying lawn chairs, which had been leaning against the dilapidated chicken coop I had never bothered to remove, were gone. So, for that matter, was the chicken coop. They had been present the last time I had passed this way. All of the dead tree limbs which had previously been strewn about, as well as a rotting mass of them I had long ago heaped to cut for firewood, were also gone. The compost heap was missing. I moved to the space where it had been. All that was there was an irregular patch of bare earth of the approximate shape of the heap itself. But I discovered in attuning myself to the jewel that I could make myself feel its presence. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to do so. Nothing. I looked again, searching carefully, but there was no telltale glitter anywhere in sight. Not that I'd really expected to see anything, not if I could not feel it nearby. There had been no curtains in the lighted room. Studying the house now, I saw that none of the windows had curtains, shades, shutters, or blinds. Therefore, I passed around the other end of the house. Approaching the first lighted window, and I glanced in quickly. Drop cloths covered much of the floor. A man in cap and overalls was painting the far wall. Of course. I'd asked Bill to sell the place. I had signed the necessary papers while a patient in the local clinic. When I had been projected back to my old home, probably by some action of the jewel, on the occasion of my stabbing. That would have been several weeks ago, local time, using the amber to shadow earth conversion factor of approximately 2.5 to 1, and allowing for the 8 days the courts of chaos had cost me in amber. Bill, of course, had gone ahead on my request. But the place had been in bad shape, abandoned as it had been for a number of years, vandalized. It needed some new window panes, some roofing work, new guttering, painting, sanding, buffing, and there'd been a lot of trash to haul away, outside as well as inside. I turned away and walked down the front slope to the road, recalling my last passage this way, half delirious, on my hands and knees, blood leaking from my side. It had been much colder that night, and there had been snow on the ground and in the air. I passed near the spot where I'd sat, trying to flag down a car with a pillowcase. The memory was slightly blurred, but I still recalled the ones that had passed me by. Across the road, made my way through the field to the trees. Unhitching Drum, I mounted. "We've some more riding ahead," I told him. "Not too far this time." We headed back to the road and started along it, continuing on past my house. If I had not told Bill to go ahead and sell the place, the compost heap would still have been there. The jewel would still have been there. I could be on my way back to Amber with the ruddy stone hung about my neck, ready to have a try at what had to be done. Now I had to go looking for it, when I had a feeling time was beginning to press once again. At least I had a favorable ratio here with respect to its passage in Amber. I clucked at Drum and shook the reins. No sense wasting it, even so. A half hour and I was into town, riding down a quiet street in a residential area, houses all about me. The lights were on at Bill's place. I turned up his driveway. I left Drum in his backyard. Alice answered my knock, stared a moment, then said, "My God, Carl!" Minutes later, I was seated in the living room with Bill, a drink on the table to my right. Alice was out of the kitchen, having made the mistake of asking me whether I wanted something to eat. Bill studied me as he lit his pipe. "Your ways of coming and going still tend to be colorful," he said. I smiled. "Expediency is all," I said. "The nurse at the clinic. Scarcely anyone believed her story." "Scarcely anyone?" "The minority I refer to is, of course, myself." "What was her story?" "She claimed you walked to the center of the room, became two-dimensional, and just faded away. Like the old soldier that you are, with a rainbow-like accompaniment." "Glaucoma can cause the rainbow symptom. She ought to have her eyes checked." "She did," he said. "Nothing wrong." "Oh, Too bad. The next thing that comes to mind is neurological. Come on, Carl. She's all right. You know that. I smiled and took a sip of my drink. And you, he said, you look like a certain playing card I once commented on, complete with sword. What's going on, Carl? It's still complicated, I said, even more than the last time we talked. Which means you can't give me that explanation yet? I shook my head. You have won an all-expense tour of my homeland when this is over, I said, if I still have a homeland then. Right now, time is doing terrible things. What can I do to help you? Information, please. My old house. Who's the guy you have fixing the place up? Ed Welland, local contractor. You know him, I think. Didn't he put in a shower for you or something? Yes, he did. I remember. He's expanded quite a bit. Bought some heavy equipment. Has a number of fellows working for him now. I handled his incorporation. Do you know what he's got working at my place now? Offhand, no, but I can find out in just a minute. He moved his hand to rest on the telephone on the side table. Shall I give him a ring? Yes, I said, but there is a little more to it than that. There is only one thing in which I am really interested. There was a compost heap in the backyard. It was there the last time I passed this way, and it is gone now. I have to find out what became of it. He cocked his head to the right and grinned around his pipe. You serious? He finally said. Sure as death, I said. I hid something in that heap when I crawled by, decorating the snow with my precious bodily fluids. I've got to have it back now. Just what is it? A ruby pendant. Priceless, I suppose. You're right. He nodded slowly. If it were anyone else, I would suspect a practical joke, he said. A treasure in a compost heap. Family heirloom? Yes, 40 or 50 carats. Simple setting, heavy chain. He removed his pipe and whistled softly. Mind if I ask why you put it there? I'd be dead now if I hadn't. Pretty good reason. He reached for the phone again. We've had some action on the house already, he remarked. Pretty good, since I hadn't advertised yet. Fellow'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone else. I took him over this morning. He's thinking about it. We may move it pretty quick. He began to dial. Wait, I said. Tell me about him. He cradled the phone, looked up. Thin guy, he said. Redhead. Had a beard. Said he was an artist. Wants a place in the country. Son of a bitch, I said, just as Alice came into the room with a tray. She made a tisking sound and smiled as she delivered it to me. Just a couple of hamburgers and some leftover salad, she said. Nothing to get excited about. Thank you, I said. I was getting ready to eat my horse. I'd have felt bad afterward. I don't imagine he'd have been too happy about it himself. Enjoy, she said, and returned to the kitchen. Was the compost heap still there when you took him over? I asked. He closed his eyes and furrowed his brow. No, he said after a moment. The yard was already clear. That's something anyway, I said, and I began eating. He made the call and he talked for several minutes. I got the drift of things from his end of the conversation, but I listened to the entire thing after he had hung up, while I finished the food and washed it down with what was left in my glass. He hated to see good compost go to waste, Bill said, so he pitched the heap into his pickup just the other day and took it out to his farm. He dumped it next to a plot he intends to cultivate, and he has not had a chance to spread it yet. Says he did not notice any jewelry, but then he could easily have missed it. I nodded. If I can borrow a flashlight, I'd better get moving. Sure, I'll drive you out, he said. I don't know what I'm doing with Bill's voice. He turned to like a New Yorker for a second. Where am I? Sure, I'll drive you out, he said. I do not want to be parted from my horse at this point. Well, you'll probably want a rake and a shovel or a pitchfork. I can drive them out and meet you there, if you know where the place is. I know where Ed's place is. He must have tools, though. Bill shrugged and smiled. All right, I said. Let me use your bathroom, and then we had better get moving. You seemed as if you knew the prospective buyer. I put the tray aside and rose to my feet. You heard of him last as Brandon Corey. The guy who pretended to be your brother and got you committed? Pretended? Hell, he is my brother. No fault of mine, though. Excuse me. He was there. Where? Ed's place this afternoon. At least a bearded redhead was. Doing what? Said he was an artist. Said he wanted permission to set up his easel and paint in one of the fields. And Ed let him? Yes, of course. Thought it was a great idea. That is why he told me about it. Wanted to brag. And get the stuff. I'll meet you there. Right. The second thing I took out in the bathroom was my trumps. I had to reach someone in Amber soonest. Someone strong enough to stop him. But who? Benedict was on his way to the Courts of Chaos. Random was off looking for his son. I had just parted on Gerard on somewhat less than amicable terms. I wished that I had a trump for Ganelon. I decided that I would have to try Gerard. I drew forth his card. I performed the proper mental maneuvers. Moments later, I had contact. Colwyn! Just listen, Gerard. Brand is alive, if that is any consolation. I'm damn sure of that. This is important. Life and death. You got to do something. Fast. His expressions had changed rapidly while I had spoken. Anger, surprise, interest. Go ahead, he said. Brand could be coming back very soon. In fact, he may already be in Amber. You haven't seen him yet, have you? No. He must be stopped from walking the pattern. I do not understand, but I can post a guard outside the chamber to the pattern. Put the guard inside the chamber. He has strange ways of coming and going now. Terrible things may happen if he walks the pattern. I'll watch it personally, then. What is happening? No time now. Here's the next thing. Is Luella back in Rebma? Yes, she is. Get hold of her with her trump. She's got to warn Moira that the pattern in Rebma has to be guarded also. How serious is this, Corwin? It could be the end of everything, I said. I have to go now. I broke the contact and headed for the kitchen in the back door, stopping only long enough to thank Alice and say goodnight. If Brand had got hold of the jewel and attuned himself to it, I was not certain what he would do, but I had a pretty strong hunch. I mounted Drum and turned him toward the road. Bill was already backing out of the driveway. Let's see. The next chapter is 12 pages. Sure. Chapter 11. I cut through fields in many places where Bill had to follow the roads, so I was not all that far behind him. When I drew up, he was talking with Ed, who was gesturing toward the southwest. As I dismounted, Ed was studying Drum. Nice horse, that. I don't know why he's British. Nice horse, that. And now he's terribly, really bad southern accent. That's fucked up. I live in the South. Come on, man. I can do a better southern accent than that. I hear it all the time. Nice horse, that. Nah, it's still shitty. Whatever. I can only do it when I'm talking to someone else with a southern accent. Thanks. You've been away. Yes. We shook hands. Glad to see you again. Now, I was just telling Bill that I don't really know how long the artist stayed around. I figured he would probably go away when it got dark and I didn't pay too much attention. Now, If he was really looking for something of yours and knew about the compost heap, he could still be out there for all I know. I'll get my shotgun if you like and go with you." "No," I said. "Thanks. I think I know who it was. The gun will not be necessary. We'll just walk over and do a little poking around." "Okay," he said. "Let me come along and give you a hand." "You don't have to do that," I said. "How about your horse, then? What say I give him a drink and something to eat, clean him up a bit?" "I'm sure he'd be grateful." "I know I would. What's his name?" "Drum." He approached Drum and began making friends with him. "All right," he said. "I'll be in the back of the barn for a while. If you need me for anything, just holler." "Thanks." I got the tools out of Bill's car, and he carried the... Might be spending a day getting rid of that. I got the tools out of Bill's car, and he carried the electric lantern, leading me off to the southwest where Ed had been pointing earlier. As we crossed the field, I followed the beam of Bill's light, searching for the heap. When I saw what might be the remains of one, I drew a deep breath involuntarily. Someone must have been at it, the way the clods were strewn about. The mass would not have been dumped from a truck to fall in such a dispersed fashion. Still, the fact that someone had looked did not mean that he had located what he had been seeking. "What do you think?" Bill said. "I don't know," I told him, lowering the tools to the ground and approaching the largest aggregate in sight. "Give me some light here." I scanned what remained of the heap, then fetched a rake and began taking it apart. I broke each clod and spread it upon the ground, running the tines through it. After a time, Bill set the lantern at a good angle and moved to help me. "I've got a funny feeling," he said. "So do I. That we may be too late." We kept pulverizing and spreading, pulverizing and spreading. I felt the tingle of a familiar presence. I straightened and waited. Contact came moments later. "Colvin!" "Here, Gerard." "What'd you say?" said Bill. I raised my hand to silence him and gave my attention to Gerard. He stood in shadow at the bright beginning of the pattern, leaning upon his great blade. "You are right," he said. "Brand did show up here, just a moment ago. I'm not sure how he got in. He stepped out of the shadows off to the left. There." He gestured. He looked at me for a moment, then turned around and walked back. He did not answer when I hailed him. So I turned up the lantern, but he was nowhere in sight. He just disappeared. What do you want me to do now? Was he wearing the Jewel of Judgment? I could not tell. I only caught sight of him for a moment, in this bad light. Are they watching the pattern in Rebma now? Yes, Duella's alerted them. Good. Stay on guard then. I'll be in touch again. All right. Colvin, about what happened earlier, forget it. Thanks. That Ganelon is one tough fellow. Indeed, I said. Stay awake. His image faded as I released the contact, but a strange thing happened then. The sense of contact, the path, remained with me, objectless, open, like a switched-on radio not tuned to anything. Bill was looking at me peculiarly. Kyle, what is happening? I don't know. Wait a minute. Suddenly, there was contact again, though not with Gerard. She must have been trying to reach me while my attention was diverted. Corwin, it is important. Go ahead, Phi. You will not find what you're looking for there. Brand has it. I was beginning to suspect as much. We have to stop him. I do not know how much you know. Neither do I anymore, I said. But I have the pattern in Amber and the one in Rebma under guard. Gerard just told me that Brand appeared at the one in Amber, but was scared off. She nodded her small, fine-featured face. Her red tresses were unusually disarrayed. She looked tired. I'm aware of this, she said. I have him under surveillance. But you've forgotten another possibility. No, I said. According to my calculations, Tyrannus should not be attainable yet. That is not what I was referring to. He is headed for the primal pattern itself. To attune the jewel? The first time through, she said. To walk it, he would have to pass through the damaged area. I gather that is more than a little difficult. So you do know about it, she said. Good, that saves time. The dark area would not trouble him the way it would another of us. He has come to terms with that darkness. We must stop him, now. Do you know any shortcuts to that place? Yes, come to me. I will take you there. Just a minute. I want Drum with me. What for? No telling. That's why I want him. Very well, then bring me through. We can as easily depart from there as from here. I extended my hand. In a moment, I held hers. She stepped forward. Lord, said Bill, drawing back. You were giving me doubts about your sanity, Carl. Now it's mine I wonder about. I hope I muted myself in time. I just sneezed. She's on one of the cards too, isn't she? Yes. Bill, this is my sister Fiona. Fiona, this is Bill Roth, a very good friend. Vi extended her hand and smiled, and I left them there while I went back to fetch Drum. A few minutes later, I held him forth. Bill, I said, I'm sorry to have wasted your time. My brother has the thing. We're going after him now. Thanks for helping me. I shook his hand. He said, Corwin? I smiled. Yes, that is my name. We've been talking, your sister and I. Not much I could learn in a few minutes, but I know it's dangerous, so good luck. I still want the whole story one day. I'm gonna have to figure out a better voice for Bill for the Merlin cycle. Thanks, I said. I'll try to see that you get it. I mounted, leaned down, and drew Fiona up before me. Good night, Mr. Roth, she said. Then to me, start riding, slowly, across the field. I did. Bran says you were the one who stabbed him, I said, as soon as we had gone far enough to feel alone. That's right. Why? To avoid all this. I talked with him for a long while. Claimed it was originally you, Blaze, and himself, together in a scheme to seize power. That is correct. He told me he had approached Cain, trying to win him to your side, but that Cain would have none of it. That Cain had passed the word along to Eric and Julian, and this led to their forming their own group to block your way to the throne. That is basically correct. Cain had ambitions of his own. Long-term ones, but ambitions nevertheless. He was in no position to pursue them, however, so he decided that if his lot was to be a lesser one, he would rather serve it under Eric than under Blaze. I can see his point, too. He also claimed that the three of you had a deal going with the powers at the end of the Black Road and the Courts of Chaos. Yes, she said, we did. You used the past tense. For myself and Blaze, yes. That's not the way Brand tells it. He wouldn't. He said you and Blaze wanted to continue exploiting that alliance, but that he had had a change of heart. Because of this, he claims you turned on him and imprisoned him in that tower. Why didn't we just kill him? I give up. You tell me. He was too dangerous to be allowed his freedom, but we could not kill him either because he held something vital. What? With Dworkin gone, Brand was the only one who knew how to undo the damage he had done to the primal pattern. You had a long time to get that information out of him. He possesses unbelievable resources. Then why did you stab him? I repeat, to avoid all this. If it became a question of his freedom or his death, it were better he died. We would have to take our chances on figuring the method of repairing the pattern. This being the case, why did you consent to cooperate in bringing him back? First, I was not cooperating. I was trying to impede the attempt, but there were too many trying too hard. You got through to him in spite of me. Second, I had to be on hand to try to kill him in the event you succeeded. Too bad things worked out the way they did. You say that you and Blaze had second thoughts about the alliance, but that Brand did not. Yes. How did your second thoughts affect your desire for the throne?
We thought we could manage it without any additional outside help.
I see.
Do you believe me?
I'm afraid that I am beginning to.
Turn here.
I entered a cleft in the hillside. The way was narrow and very dark, with only a small band of stars above us. Fiona had been manipulating shadow while we had talked, leading us from Ed's field downward into a misty moor-like place, then up again to a clear and rocky trail among the mountains. Now, as we moved through the dark defile, I felt her working with shadow again. The air was cool but not cold. The blackness to our left and our right was absolute, giving the illusion of enormous depths, rather than nearby rock cloaked in shadow. This impression was reinforced, I suddenly realized, by the fact that Drum's hoofbeats were not producing any echoes, aftersounds, overtones.
What can I do to gain your trust? She said.
That's asking quite a bit. She laughed.
Let me rephrase it. What can I do to convince you that I'm telling the truth?
Just answer one question.
What?
Who shot out my tires? She laughed again.
You figured it out, haven't you?
Maybe. You tell me.
Brand, she said. He had failed in his effort to destroy your memory, so he decided he would do a more thorough job.
The version I had of the story was that Blaze had done the shooting and left me in the lake, that Bran had arrived in time to drag me out and save my life. In fact, the police report seemed to indicate something to that effect.
Who called the police? She asked.
They had it listed as an anonymous call, but
Blaze called them. He couldn't reach you in time to save you once he realized what was happening. He hoped that they could. Fortunately, they did.
What do you mean?
Brand did not drag you out of the wreck. You did it yourself. He waited around to be certain you were dead, and you surfaced and pulled yourself ashore. He went down and was checking you over to decide whether you would die if he just left you there, or whether he should throw you back in again. The police arrived then, and he had to clear out. We caught up with him shortly afterward, and were able to subdue him and imprison him in the tower. That took a lot of doing. Later, I contacted Eric and told him what had happened. He then ordered Flora to put you in the other place and see that you were held until after his coronation.
It fits, I said. Thanks.
What does it fit?
I was only a small-town GP in simpler times than these, and I never had much to do with psychiatric cases, but I do know that you don't give a person electroshock therapy to restore memories. EST generally does just the opposite. It destroys some of the short-term ones. My suspicions began to stir when I learned that was what Brand had done to me. So I came up with my own hypothesis. The auto-wreck did not restore my memories, and neither did the EST. I'd finally begun recovering them naturally, not as the result of any particular trauma. I must have done something or said something to indicate that this was occurring. Word of it somehow got to Brand, and he decided that this would not be a good thing to have happened at that time. So we journeyed to my shadow and managed to get me committed and subjected to treatment which he hoped would wipe out those things I had recently recovered. This was just partly successful, and that its only lasting effect was to fuzz me up for the few days surrounding the sessions. The accident may have contributed too, but when I escaped from Porter and lived through his attempt to kill me, the process of recovery continued after I regained consciousness in Greenwood and left the place. I was remembering more and more when I was staying at Flora's. The recovery was accelerated by randoms taking me to Rebma, where I walked the pattern. If this had not occurred, however, I am convinced now that it all would have come back anyway. It might have taken somewhat longer, but I had broken through and the remembering was an ongoing process, coming faster and faster near the end. So I concluded that Brand was trying to sabotage me. And that is what fits the things you just told me. The band of stars had narrowed, and had finally vanished above us. We advanced through what seemed a totally black tunnel now, with perhaps the tiniest flickering of light a great distance ahead of us.
Yes, she said in the darkness before me. You guessed correctly. Brand was afraid of you. He claimed he had seen your return one night and tiered an oath to the undoing of all our plans. I paid him no heed at the time, for I was not even aware that you still lived. It must have been then that he set out to find you. Whether he divined your whereabouts by some arcane means or simply saw it in Eric's mind, I do not know. Probably the latter. He is occasionally capable of such a feat. However, he located you, and you now know the rest.
It was Flora's presence in that place and her strained liaison with Eric that first made him suspicious. Or so he said. Not that it matters now. What do you propose doing with him if we get our hands on him?
She chuckled. You are wearing your blade, she said.
Brand told me not all that long ago that Blaze is still alive. Is this true?
Yes.
Then why am I here rather than Blaze?
Blaze is not attuned to the jewel. You are. You interact with it at near distances, and it will attempt to preserve your life if you are in imminent danger of losing it. The risk, therefore, is not as great, she said.
Then, moments later,
don't take it for granted, though. A swift stroke can still beat its reaction. You can die in its presence.
The light ahead grew brighter, larger. But there were no drafts, sounds, or smells from that direction. Advancing, I thought of the layers upon layers of explanations I had received since my return, each with its own complex of motivations, justifications for what had happened while I was away, for what had happened since, for what was happening now. The emotions, the plans, the feelings, the objectives I had seen swirled like floodwater through the city of facts that I was slowly erecting on the grave of my other self. And though an act is an act in the best Steinian tradition, each wave of interpretation that broke upon me shifted the position of one or more things I had thought safely anchored, and by this brought about an alteration of the whole, to the extent that all of life seemed almost a shifting interplay of shadow about the amber of some never-to-be-attained truth. Still, I could not deny that I knew more now than I did several years earlier, that I was closer to the heart of matters than I had been before, that the entire action in which I had been caught up upon my return seemed now to be sweeping towards some final resolution. And what did I want? A chance to find out what was right and a chance to act on it. I laughed. Who was ever granted the first, let alone the second of these? A workable approximation of truth, then. That would be enough. And a chance to swing my blade a few times in the right direction. The highest compensation I would receive from a 1 o'clock world for the changes wrought since noon. I laughed again and made sure my blade was loose in the sheath. Brand said that Blaze had raised another army, I began.
Later, she said, later. There is no more time.
And she was right. The light had grown large, become a circular opening. It had approached at a rate out of proportion to our advance, as though the tunnel itself were contracting. It seemed to be daylight that was rushing in, through what I chose to regard as the cave mouth. All right, I said, and moments later we reached the opening and passed through it. I blinked my eyes as we emerged. To my left was the sea, which seemed to merge with it with the same colored sky. The golden sun which floated/hung above/within it bounced beams of brilliance from all directions. Behind me, now, there was nothing but rock. Our passage to this place had vanished without a sign. Not too far below and before me, perhaps 100 feet distant, lay the primal pattern. A figure was negotiating the second of its outer arcs, his attention so confined by this activity that he had apparently not yet noted our presence. A flash of red as he took another turn. The jewel, hanging now from his neck as it had hung from mine, from Eric's, from Dad's. The figure, of course, was Brand's. I dismounted. I looked up at Fiona, small and distraught, and I placed Drum's reins in her hand. "Any advice other than to go after him?" I whispered. She shook her head. Turning then, I drew Grey Swandeer and strode forward. "Good luck," she said softly. As I walked toward the pattern, I saw the long chain leading from the cave mouth to the now still form of the griffin Wixer. Wixer's head lay on the ground several paces to the left of his body. Body and head both leaked a normal-colored blood upon the stone. As I approached the beginning of the pattern, I did a quick calculation. Brand had already taken several turns about the general spiral of the design. He was approximately 2.5 laps into it. If we were only separated by one winding, I could reach him with my blade once I achieved a position paralleling his own. The going, however, got rougher and rougher as one penetrated its design. Consequently, Brand was moving at a steadily decreasing pace, so it would be close. I did not have to catch him. I just had to pick up a lap and a half and obtain a position across from him. I placed my foot upon the pattern and moved forward, as fast as I was able. The blue sparks began about my feet as I rushed through the first curve against the rising resistance. The sparks grew quickly. My hair was beginning to rise when I hit the first veil, and the crackling of the sparks was quite audible now. I pushed on against the pressure of the veil, wondering whether Brand had noticed me yet, unable to afford the distraction of a glance in his direction just then. I met the resistance with increased force, and several steps later I was through the veil and moving more easily again. I looked up. Brand was just emerging from the terrible second veil, blue sparks as high as his waist. He was grinning a grin of resolve and triumph as he pulled free and took a clear step forward. Then he saw me. The grin went away and he hesitated, point in my favor. You never stop on the pattern if you can help it. If you do, it costs a lot of extra energy to get moving again. "You are too late," he called out. I did not answer him, I just kept going. Blue fires fell from the pattern tracery along Grey Swandeer's length. "You will not make it through the black," he said. I kept going. The dark area was just ahead of me now. I was glad that it had not occurred over one of the more difficult portions of the pattern this time around. Brand moved forward and slowly began his movement toward the grand curve. If I could catch him there, it would be no contest. He would not have the strength or the speed to defend himself. As I approached the damaged portion of the pattern, I recalled the means by which Ganelon and I had cut the Black Road on our flight from Avalon. I had succeeded in breaking the power of the road by holding the image of the pattern in my mind as we had gone across. Now, of course, I had the pattern itself all about me, and the distance was not nearly so great. While my first thought had been that Brand was simply trying to rattle me with his threat, it occurred to me that the force of the dark place might well be much stronger here at its source. As I came up to it, Grey Swandeer blazed with a sudden intensity which outshone its previous light. On an impulse, I touched its point to the edge of the blackness, at the place where the pattern ended. Grey Swandeer clove to the blackness and would not be raised above it. I continued forward, and my blade sliced the area before me, sliding ahead in what seemed an approximation of the original tracery. I followed. The sun seemed to darken as I trod the dark ground. I was suddenly conscious of my heartbeat, and perspiration formed on my brow. A grayish cast fell over everything. The world seemed to dim, the pattern to fade. It seemed it would be easy to step amiss in this place, and I was not certain whether the result would be the same as a misstep within the intact portions of the pattern. I did not want to find out. I kept my eyes low, following the line Grey Swandeer was inscribing before me, the blade's blue fire now the only thing of color left to the world. Right foot, left foot. Then suddenly I was out of it, and Grey Swandeer swung free in my hand once again. The fires partly diminished, whether by contrast with the re-illuminated prospect, or for some other reason I did not know. Looking about, I saw that Brand was approaching the Grand Curve. As for me, I was working my way toward the second veil. We would both be involved in the strenuous efforts these entailed in a few more minutes. The Grand Curve is more difficult, more prolonged than the second veil. However, I should be free and moving more quickly again before he worked his way through his barrier. Then I would have to cross the damaged area another time. He might be free by then, but he would be moving more slowly than I would, for he would be into the area where the going becomes even more difficult. A steady static arose with each step that I took, and a tingling sensation permeated my entire body. The sparks rose to mid-thigh as I moved. It was like striding through a field of electric wheat. My hair was at least partly risen by then. I could feel it stirring. I glanced back once to see Fiona, still mounted, unmoving, watching. I pressed ahead to the second veil. Angles. Short, sharp turns. The force rose and rose against me, so that all of my attention, all of my strength, was now occupied in striving against it. There came again that familiar sense of timelessness, as though this was all I had ever done and all that I ever would do, and will. A focusing of desire to such an intensity that everything else was excluded. Brand, Fiona, Amber, my own identity. The sparks rose to even greater heights as I struggled, turned, labored, each step requiring more effort than the previous one. I pushed through, right into the black area again. Reflexively, I moved Grey Swandeer down and ahead once more. Again, the grayness, the monochrome fog, cut by the blue of my blade, opening the way before me like a surgical incision. When I emerged into normal light, I sought Brand. He was still in the western quadrant, struggling with the Grand Curve. About 2/3 of the way through it. If I pushed hard, I might be able to catch him just as he was coming out of it. I threw all of my strength into moving as quickly as possible. As I made it to the north end of the pattern and into the curve leading back, it struck me suddenly what I was about to do. I was rushing to spill more blood upon the pattern. If it came to a simple choice between further damage to the pattern and Brand's destroying it utterly, then I knew what I had to do. Yet I felt there had to be another way. Yes. I slowed my pace just a trifle. It was going to be a matter of timing. His passage was a lot rougher than mine just then, so I had an edge in that respect. My entire new strategy involved arranging our encounter at just the right point. Ironically, at that moment, I recalled Brand's concern for his rug. The problem of keeping this place clean was a lot trickier, though. He was nearing the end of the Grand Curve, and I paced him while calculating the distance to the blackness. I decided to let him do his bleeding over the area which had already been damaged. The only disadvantage I seemed to possess was that I would be situated to Brand's right. To minimize the benefit this would give him when we crossed blades, I would have to remain somewhat to the rear. Brand struggled and advanced, all of his movements in slow motion. I struggled too, but not as hard. I kept the pace. I wondered as I went, about the jewel, about the affinity we had shared since the attunement. I could feel its presence there to my left and ahead, even though I could not see it now upon Brand's breast. Would it really act to save me across that distance should Brand gain the upper hand in our coming conflict? Feeling its presence, I could almost believe that it would. It had torn me from one assailant and found somehow, within my mind, a traditional place of safety. My own bed, and had transported me there. Feeling it now, almost seeing the way before Brand was through it, I felt some assurance that it would attempt to function on my behalf once again. Recalling Fiona's words, however, I was determined not to rely on it. Still, I had considered its other functions, speculated upon my ability to operate it without contact. Brand had almost completed the grand curve. I reached out from some level of my being and made contact with the jewel, laying my will upon it. I called for a storm of the red tornado variety which had destroyed Iago. I did not know whether I could control that particular phenomenon in this particular place, but I called for it nevertheless and directed it toward Brand. Nothing happened immediately, though I felt the jewel functioning to achieve something. Brand came to the end, offered a final exertion, passed from the grand curve. I was right there behind him. He knew it, too, somehow. His blade was out the instant the pressure was off. He gained a couple of feet faster than I thought he would, got his left foot ahead of him, turned his body, and met my gaze over the lines of our blades. "Damned if you didn't make it," he said, touching the tip of my blade with his own. "You would never have gotten here this soon if it weren't for that bit on the horse, though." "Nice way to talk about our sister," I said, feinting and watching him move to parry. We were hampered in that neither of us could lunge without departing the pattern. I was further hampered in not wanting to make him bleed yet. I faked a stop thrust, and he drew back, sliding his left foot along the design to his rear. He withdrew his right, then stamped it, and tried a head cut without preliminaries. Damn it. I parried and then riposted by pure reflex. I did not want to catch him with the chest cut I had thrown back at him, but the tip of Grayswandir traced an arc beneath his sternum. I heard a humming in the air above us. I cannot afford to take my eyes off of Brand, though. He glanced downward and backed some more. Good. A red line now decorated his shirt front where my cut had taken him. So far, the material seemed to be absorbing it. I stamped, feinted, thrust, parried, stop thrust, bound and unbound. Everything I could think of to keep him retreating. I had the psychological edge on him in that I had the greater reach, and we both knew that I could do more things with it more quickly. Brand was nearing the dark area, just a few more paces. I heard a sound like a single bell chime, followed by a great roaring. A shadow suddenly fell upon us, as though a cloud had just occluded the sun. Brand glanced up. I think I could have gotten him just then, but he was still a couple of feet too far from the target area. He recovered immediately and glared at me. "Damn you, Corwin, that's yours, isn't it?" he cried, and then he attacked, discarding what caution he still possessed. Unfortunately, I was in a bad position as I'd been edging up on him, preparing to press him the rest of the way back. I was exposed and slightly off balance. Even as I parried, I realized that it would not be sufficient, and I twisted and fell back. I struggled to keep my feet in place as I went down. I caught myself with my right elbow in my left hand. I cursed as the pain was too much, and my elbow slid to the side, dropping me to my right shoulder. But Brand's thrust had gone by me, and within blue halos my feet still touched the line. I was out of Brand's reach for a death thrust, though he could still hamstring me. I raised my right arm, still clutching Grayswandir before me. I began to sit up. As I did, I saw that the red formation, yellow about the edges, was now spinning directly above Brand, crackling with sparks and small lightnings. Its roar now changed to a wailing. Brand took hold of his blade by the forte and raised it above his shoulder, like a spear pointed in my direction. I knew that I could not parry it, that I could not dodge it. With my mind, I reached out to the jewel and up to the formation in the sky. There came a bright flash as a small finger of lightning reached down and touched his blade. The weapon fell from his hand, and his hand flew to his mouth. With his left hand, he clutched at the Jewel of Judgment, as if he realized what I was doing and sought to nullify it by covering the stone. Sucking his fingers, he looked upward, all the anger draining from his face, to be replaced by a look of fear verging on terror. The cone was beginning to descend. Turning then, he stepped onto the blackened area, faced south, raised both of his arms, and cried out something I could not hear above the wailing. The cone fell toward him, but he seemed to grow two-dimensional as it approached. His outline wavered. He began to shrink, but it did not seem a function of actual size, so much as an effect of distancing. He dwindled, was gone. A bare instant before the cone licked across the area he had occupied. With him went the jewel, so that I was left with no way of controlling the thing above me. I did not know whether it was better to maintain a low profile or to resume a normal stance in the pattern. I decided on the latter, but because the whirlwind seemed to go for things which broke the normal sequence. I got back into a sitting position and edged over the line. Then I leaned forward into a crouch, by which time the big cone began to rise. The wailing retreated down the scale as it withdrew. The blue fires about my boots had subsided completely. I turned and looked at Fiona. She motioned me to get up and go on. So I rose slowly, seeing that the vortex above me continued to dissipate as I moved. Advancing upon the area where Brand had so recently stood, I once again used Gracewandir to guide me through. The twisted remains of Brand's blade lay near the far edge of the dim place. I wished there were some easy way out of the pattern. It seemed pointless to complete it now, but there is no turning back once you have set foot upon it, and I was extremely leery of trying to take the dark route out. So I headed on toward the grand curve. To what place, I wondered, had Brand taken himself? If I knew, I could command the pattern to send me after him once I'd reached the center. Perhaps Fiona had an idea. Still, he would probably head for a place where he had allies. It would be senseless to pursue him alone. At least I had stopped the attunement, I consoled myself. Then I entered the grand curve. The sparks shot up about me. Whew, okay. There we go. Double chappy for your viewing pleasure. Oh man, my throat's killing me. I was especially getting bad near the end there. Alright, well, hopefully this will tide you guys over till next week. I would say I would do more this. I might actually, you know what? I might be able to record Monday on Labor Day. I'm not working on Labor Day, so I'll say I have a friend's wedding this Saturday. I'm not a groomsman at that one though, so and it's not, my family member, so I don't have to. I just basically got to show up, but it's still gonna probably take a good chunk out of my day. But yeah, I'll see you guys at some point. Monday I might try. If not, then Saturday, Sunday. Excuse me. This time I'm gonna plan on just keeping this note on my desk so that I remember to read. I'll be real. I just completely it slipped my mind the last time. I had other stuff going on, so no excuses. Just me being a dumbass. So 4 days late. So I apologize. Anyways, next time we're getting near the end. There's only a couple more chapters. Well, 3 more chapters, I think. So we're almost there. And then we get to start Courts of Chaos, the final book in Corwin's cycle. And then we can start the Merlin cycle. I'll try to get through Courts of Chaos before the holiday season. And then there'll be a hiatus while I'm super crazy busy during the holidays. And then I will come back January, February. Hell, those are pretty busy for us too. March at the latest, but I'm gonna try to come back January, February. But yeah, basically November through January is the busiest time of year for the business. So that's what's going on with that. Anyhow, I'll see you guys some other time. Later.